Progress.
Welcome, everybody. We have several things to talk about, or a couple things actually, before we start today's lecture. And the first one is, some of you, well, let me go to a closer up speaker's view. Actually, you can't see from there, but I am wearing over one of my pockets the sticker from the Pharaoh's Gold exhibit. Hang on, nothing's been working right today. That's why I was a minute or so late again. Not the outlets, not the fans, which it's pretty hot here. Surprisingly, I thought that was over, but obviously it isn't, at least not in this part of Berkeley. Hope you guys aren't sweltering up there. I doubt it, right? Hopefully the worst of the heat wave is over. Anyway, I went on Sunday to the Pharaoh's Gold exhibit, and I can give you a couple of tips about it. First of all, it's fabulous. And it's a really good way to earn 10 points extra credit. And even though we don't cover ancient Egyptian art here, some of you take an ancient art history, of course, you may have already studied that. You'd learn a lot just from what's on the walls, of course, but also they did a nice job with some of these mini documentaries, I would call them, that those are well done. And then also, you know, like bird's eye, or not bird's eye, sorry, human eye level, you know, views or tours. It's probably a walking sort of camera views through, I don't know, half a dozen of the major tombs that have to do with several pharaohs, but primarily with the one they focused on, which is Ramses, who lasted longer on the throne than any ancient Egyptian pharaoh, 67 years. He lived to be 92. That even now is a good age. In fact, in the ancient world, that's remarkable. Yeah, so they had some wonderful pieces that I won't take your time up to describe individually. My only minor little caveat about it was that they didn't put the dates on things. Now, it's true they gave the dynasty, but if you didn't have in front of you, as you're looking at each display case, a summary of those dates, they did put them on the wall, you know, when the different dynasties ruled. 3,000 years is a long time of ancient Egyptian history. And so what you had was a kind of a general overall idea of whenever anything from the reign of Ramses himself, the one they focused on, but it wasn't more than half the objects. The rest were from other reigns, which is no problem. That was great to see a broad diversity or range of everything from jewelry to gold masks to coffins and even animal mummies. Really interesting, well done display. But without the dates, as an art historian or student of art history, I don't know if any of the rest of you would agree with this, but it kind of left me thinking, I wish that was the one detail they had added. So there were summaries at the end, but in the last 2 or 3 rooms, surprisingly twice in the last 3 rooms, I think, a couple rooms before the final one, and then on the wall of the final room, that gave a range of times for each dynasty. But you didn't see that till you were almost all the way through the exhibit. So it's a minor critique. It doesn't affect the fact that it was a great exhibit at the De Young, and you can't just walk in. And if you're not a member, it's $40, but it's well worth it. If you are, it's a half price or free if you become a member, if you didn't already know that. So I got to go with my my wife on Sunday the first time, and I'm going to go with a friend who's an art history buff and ancient Egyptian lover of ancient Egyptian things. And that time I'm going to take more notes in detail. So anyway, recommend that. The De Young Museum in San Francisco, parking's right below. It isn't cheap, so you probably want to go with someone that split the cost of the parking and of course gas and bridge toll, but it's worth it. All right, then the other thing is your papers are due next week. I've had some emails, so I want to just really confirm with you that means that 1 week from Wednesday, there you go, there's your alliteration. 1 week from Wednesday, 9 days from today, is when you should have your papers ready. But I accept them right up until midnight without counting them being late on the day they're due, being as this is an online class. We will go over the submission process, how to submit them correctly, twice, not today. We need to get back to our slides of Baroque art that we were, I think, slightly behind, but we'll get caught up by by Wednesday. But on Wednesday, you want to be here for that lecture. I will describe and physically hold up on the computer screen. And of course, it'll be recorded and posted on YouTube by Friday. Very simple instructions for how to submit so there's no confusion and your papers don't go astray or not get logged in. I'll do that and send an email twice. I mean, you'll have like 3 reminders, so that should be enough. Remember, I don't use Canvas. I've said that every week since the first day of class. So they need to be submitted to me directly by email. We'll go over all of that on Wednesday. And I also will take roll for the very last time. It's not a choice or an option, it's a requirement. The college is doing its census roster, they call it, and that has to be submitted by Friday. So I'll do that for both my in-person class and this class on Wednesday. So please try to show up for that, but I'm not going to drop anybody else at this point. You know, if someone needs to drop, they have to do that themselves. The point is to just make sure that no one's missing from the final roster so that the grades get submitted correctly. Okay, I'll do that near the start of the class on Wednesday. All right. So any burning questions you have? Why don't we, well, if there's something that's directly, briefly tagged to what I just said about the papers, probably get, and you know, I'll stick around as long as there are questions at the end of this lecture. I kind of want to get to the first slide of what we have to finish up, which is this whole week. It's still Baroque art. But is there any question anybody still has that's, you know, very specific that I could answer in just, you know, a minute or so?
I just had a question about the printed source. So I know we have to have one printed source, but obviously found online, you know, since we're sending it via email. But does that have to be a primary source, or it just has to be just some type of resource that was printed first?
No, it can be any, if it's printed, then originally that means you found evidence, and you'd say that in your bibliography, of course, that it started at, like, the Encyclopedia Britannica is almost the most obvious source for that kind of citing. But it could be a museum brochure. In other words, it must have originally been a printed source, which usually implies more research, thoroughness, fact checking normally.
Okay.
And it could be a magazine or a newspaper article, of course. Yeah.
Right.
But
And then just,
it wouldn't be an interview or something, if that's what you're asking. That doesn't, even if that, but if that got printed, then that's okay.
okay.
If it was printed in a book or a magazine or brochure from an original interview, to me, that, yeah, I'm going to be flexible and reasonable here. Yeah, that would count. But
Okay,
you got to
and-
say that in, you know, the listing, sorry, in the bibliography.
Yeah, in the
that
citations.
source. Yeah, yeah,
Okay.
at the end, and say this is from original source and whatever that source was.
Right. And the bibliography is about the author and the piece that we're, but sorry, not the author, the artist and the piece that we're doing from that artist, or
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah, that's what you're focusing on, but you could broaden it to the culture it came from.
Okay.
Some pieces they don't, you're going to do, some of you are going to do ancient art where we don't know who the artist was. So then you have to, you know, say in your meaning section more about that context, historical context and cultural context. You know, what
Okay.
was that period or culture like, and what style of art was it that they used, as well as the meaning of the individual piece. That's essential. That should be the first thing you write about, but it doesn't have to be in that order in your meaning
Okay.
section.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
All right. Yeah, you're welcome. Okay, so let us now do this. I'm going to go to share screen for a very important slide. I did not skip over it like I wasn't going to include it, but on the other hand, let's see. I want to make sure people can, I hope this isn't a problem. It says return to meeting. Can everybody see this?
Yeah, I can see it.
Good. Yeah, well, just want to
Yep.
make sure, because when I see things on the screen that say return to meeting, I think maybe I got disconnected like that first week. Anyway, here we go. This is a very interesting work of art, and the story behind it is powerful. And it's on the list from last week, but you know, like I said, we had to get caught up, so I don't want to skip this one. Judith, the title is Judith and the Maid Servant. Judith, you know, like the first name, Judith, and the maid servant. That's the woman in the blue clothing in the lower left corner. Judith and the maid servant. The artist's name, her last name, was Gentileschi. And that's Gentileschi, 1625. Well, let's start with who was the artist. Her first name was Artemisia. You don't have to know her first name because what's on the syllabus is all you have. And of course, you have it printed. You'll have it with you in front of you during any exam, the three exams. So nonetheless, I think it's important to mention, very important, that her first name was Artemisia. And there's a wonderful movie with just that title, her first name. It's a joint French and Italian production. And it was filmed on location. She was an Italian with the last name Gentileschi. You could probably tell that means she was Italian, whose father is a young woman whose father was already a famous established artist when she was born. And when she became a teenager, I believe it was 15, around 15 or mid-teens, her father she wanted to become a painter like her father. And so her father hired a tutor for her. And sadly, that tutor took advantage. He was in his 40s, had a wife and children in another city. And he started, historians don't know for sure because it's hard to prove, but we do know this. Obviously, technically speaking, no matter how you look at it, the age difference in her being that young made him guilty of sexual assault in one way or another. In any case, they had a brief intimate relationship that she did or did not, we don't know. Doesn't matter because it wasn't appropriate, and today it would be totally illegal, but back then it wasn't even illegal so much as just the Catholic Church said, well, he's married, and so that made it adultery for both of them. And her father turned her in to the Inquisition, if you can believe it. Yes, they had an Inquisition outside of Spain. They had them in a lot of Catholic countries at that time. In the Renaissance. So she was turned into the Inquisition by her own father, as was the former tutor. They were both tortured, tried and tortured, as if she was equally guilty. I mean, come on, he was obviously the one that initiated that inappropriate relationship. So he did get punished more severely than her, but she still had to deal with months of imprisonment and physical, torture until finally the court exonerated her. Well, she never spoke, guess what? Never spoke to her father again after that. Left their hometown in Italy and moved to other parts of Europe over the next several years. The main point about this positive thing that came out of that is she became one of the most successful painters in Europe, period. The fact is also that makes her one of the few successful women painters who were known, not just in their own country, but all over Europe. Western Europe. Her painting was in demand, and she got commissions all over, like France and Belgium and I believe Holland, Germany, anyway, certainly in Italy. So she became very successful and was one of a handful of women who were at that level. There were lots of women painters, but most of them weren't given a chance, as you probably know, to succeed. But she was able to overcome those barriers. And her themes have to do with empowerment of women, the strength of women who have to take a stand for themselves. So that's what this scene is. The other part of the meaning is what is this storytelling us? It's a scene from the Bible, okay, in which the daughter of the king of Israel, ancient Israel, not now, right, decides to take matters into her own hands on the night before a big battle, snuck into the tent of the enemy commander and beheaded him. And that's what this is here. The head of the enemy, commander or ruler, he was really the king of an army, that was attacking Israel. And by doing that, she broke the morale of the enemy invaders, and they left. In other words, they either they lost, they would just say that they lost the battle the next day. Maybe that's what's happening in Ukraine now. Maybe you heard that. So the Russians are running for cover. Anyway, the point is she was brave isn't even the word. I mean, she could easily have been caught at any moment. So you see what's happening in this view that Gentileschi paints of her. She is at a moment of extreme danger, and she's in the tent, has already committed the deed of beheading the enemy commander or king. He was really king, and someone's outside the tent of that king. And of course, if they were found, they'd both be executed, probably tortured death. So it's a moment of intense danger, and yet she did not, do anything other than keep calm and get out of the tent without being discovered. And the head of the, if you're curious what the final act was, that either she or her father decided to put the head of the severed, of course, decapitated head of the enemy king on a pike or pole in the morning and show it above the battlefield, which is what demoralized the enemy army. So she helped win that battle by an act of courage and strength. Her maidservant was there to help her, of course. But the two of them against the whole army, basically, it's pretty impressive. It's a well-recorded event in history. All right, so that's the meaning. Formal analysis, well, being Baroque. Oh, I'm sorry, I always remember part of the meaning of any work of art, whether it's a painting, a sculpture, architecture, whatever, is the style of it. And that's the kind of thing you can add to the meaning sections on your papers or on the exams. So the style of this is Baroque, and how do we know that? Well, the bulbousness is obvious in the folds of their clothing, the sleeves, the maidservant's headdress, right? Even the tent roof is bulbous, kind of curving downwards, like it's sagging. And so that's one aspect. Remember, there are four features that mark them as Baroque style. The unseen presence is the enemy soldiers outside the tent. The intense emotion is danger, not fear, not fear. She's not afraid, but danger and tension. Okay, and then the incrustation and ornamentation comes in, and the details on their clothing and also on this table, these objects here that belong to the now deceased king, enemy king. So it's definitely Baroque style. All right, and is it stable or dynamic? Well, it is as much stable, I'd say almost equal. She's standing upright, you see that. Is there someone else who wants to get admitted? I don't think so. Okay, so make sure. Okay, good. So she's upright and the table is stable. Okay, tables usually are stable. And her maidservant is at least most of her upper body. So, but then their arms and the tent roof or tents. Whatever you call the roof of a tent, the fabric on the top of the tent. Those are obviously dynamic. And then all the lines are thin outlines. There's the molding or modeling, modeling, it's strong and realistic on the clothing and the skin and the hair. And of course, they're warm, mostly warm colors on her dress and of course, both of their arms and heads and the tent roof, I'll say, and then cool on the table and the white sleeves and so forth. And then she's the largest mass, then the maidservant, then the tent roof, and then the table. For space, you could guess it's all the techniques for realism, except atmospheric perspective. It's inside a dark tent, but it has overlapping, of course, foreshortening, right? Diminishing size, right? The objects get further away. And there's no register line, right? Scientific perspective, probably, yes. So almost all painters use that when they show anything other than a single portrait. In the age of realism, that's the Renaissance was always realism style painting. All right, and textures are real strong, right, on the hair, the clothing, the tent. All right, now we go to our next new artist for today, Baroque artist, one of the most famous and successful ever in the history of painting, certainly at least Western painting. I will go to the must know and then come back to this slide. This is the must know. So I'll give you the title. It is Garden, 3 words, Garden of Love. Rubens, R-U-B-E-N-S, Rubens, 1638. Well, we're going to get to this in the meaning of this exact painting in a minute, but I want to start. As part of the meaning now, remember, is who the artist is. We don't have to guess. We know all about him. Rubens was one of the wealthiest and most successful, you could say most popular if you prefer, of all painters in Europe during his lifetime. He got commissions all over Western Europe. He was from Belgium, what today is Belgium, and he was Catholic. So he got commissions in the Catholic Church, local bishops, right? As well as wealthy patrons and governments. And his paintings are all over Western Europe. You can see them in Italy and France and Holland and Belgium. I think even Germany. Anyway, so he was very successful, very popular. But it's an interesting thing about him that he came from just an average middle class background, and he happened twice to marry well. The first time, but he really genuinely loved the two first, his first wife and his second both. They really loved each other, and his first wife and he raised, I think it was 3 or 4, at least 3 children. You could just say several children. And then she died in her early 30s of a disease that was so common back then, way before, nor even back then, the average life expectancy for, a successful artist in Western Europe was at least in their 60s. So he was grief stricken for a long time. And then he went to some kind of event, I don't know, social event, and met another woman who was even wealthier. So his first wife was wealthy. She helped him because, of course, you have to worry about mortgage or rent or any of that. And his talent then was able to flourish. And then the same thing happened, and even more so in his second marriage. So it's an unusual story that his second marriage was to an even more wealthy woman. And that's when the painting of Garden of Love was done on the grounds of his second wife's estate. They also really loved each other and had, I think, a couple of more children together. So he was one of those people who wasn't a tortured soul, as many artists seem to have been throughout the history of art. But he liked more than anything else, when he chose a subject for himself, it was religious. And this isn't a must know, so you don't have to write this now. You can take just a break until we get to the must know. But this is the scene at the temple, the Jewish temple, in which the Ark of the Covenant, right, that the movie, or at least part of one Spielberg movie, was about, Indiana Jones, right? They're bringing the Ark of the Covenant, this golden box with broken pieces of the Ten Commandments, into the Jewish temple in Jerusalem. And the head rabbi is, blessing it. But these are part of all of Rubens' pictures, have these elements. I took this slide. It was from the Boston Museum of Fine Arts. It's really impressive. They have several Rubens in Boston. They obviously must have been bought 150 or more years ago when they were inexpensive. They're very expensive now. Okay, and so there's a close-up of the detail. Let's go now, though, to the must know, and I can't resist this. This is another Rubens painting. It's gross. It's meant to be disgusting. This is, Bacchus, the god of wine and debauchery, looking just like, you might expect someone who leads a life of debauchery and doesn't, think about tomorrow. And then, but you have also this baby here, again, quite literally an early ticket. I call that an early ticket to alcoholism. Swallowing some of the overflow of the wine from this woman here who's popping out of her clothes. And then this guy here, I won't even get graphic, but rather details that are not. And then this guy here, this is obviously meant to be, and even the lion down at the bottom and the lower left corner is drunk and disorderly. It's not the word. Anyway, disgusting. There we go. That was meant to be that. It was supposed to be another painting like we saw with the Garden of Earthly Delights. There's a very different garden now. We're at the Garden of Love. But 100 years earlier, you saw Bosch painting another sermon in oil paint about not behaving, badly or committing sinful behavior. But this is different. This one is totally different. Let's see. I think we need to let in. Here we go. Welcome. Yeah, we were just getting to the second must know. Okay, I'm gonna hide the thumbnail. There we go. All right, this is the Garden of Love. I've already given the title, by Rubens, 1638. Well, this is painted during the high point of his career, after he had his second marriage to an even wealthier woman than his first wife, who died just a few years earlier. And so he was able to, because of course, not worrying about finances, just paint whatever, commission he got, or, improve his social contacts, and his wife being wealthy helped him with getting commissions. But his talent is undeniable. He's famous for 3 things. These are the main parts of the meaning. When you see a Rubens painting, after you notice these features, you can tell pretty much almost immediately that it's a Rubens or someone imitating Rubens. We start with of course, this is Baroque, so bulbous, clothing, right, and hats and features on people, their attire. That's not unique to Rubens, but he carried that kind of a bulbous effect over into, look, even on the fountain. Look at this giant, strange-looking fish-like creature, and on the columns of this mock ruin. That's literally what it is. It's supposed to look like an abandoned Roman temple, but it was built by his wife just to have a place to party in the grounds of their estate. The wealthy people, of course, that's quite often the kind of thing they might do. So the whole picture has a very rounded kind of look to it, even more than most Baroque art, not just on the people or the clothing, but on all the objects, the main objects. Okay, and then another feature is this swirling effect. But when you say swirling, it might make people think, oh, you mean like, El Greco. We saw El Greco's work last week. No, this is a little different. The swirling effect is in the arrangement of the figures. So just say it this way in a single sentence. He developed his own signature motifs or techniques, one of which was to arrange his main figures in a series of concentric circle arrangements. They're not literally in a circle, but look carefully at their heads, especially as you get closer. See these women's heads? They form an oval or circle. You don't want to say circle necessarily, it has to be a circle, but some kind of a circular oval or circular motion is created by the placement of the main figures. We're talking about the human figures now, or divine, if it's a scene in heaven figures. And that's something that you can see in his work quite immediately. In fact, look at this one here. The same thing applies to this group. Here's is a tighter circle or oval, if you want to get technical, I guess, in the middle. And then there's a slightly wider one here out, right, as you get further. And then there's the overall border of, all the human figures. So he did that in almost every painting he did. But concentrating on this one now, the final signature motif you need to add, if it's on the exam, I'm not saying it will be, but I won't be cutting it from the test, the study list, when we do the review next week. This also has, as all Rubens paintings did, or at least all of his group portraits or paintings, mythical creatures arranged around the borders. And who are they? They're cupids. Cupids, of course, are these baby angels that can make people fall in love. Well, what are they doing here? That's the last part of the meaning. They're making human beings fall in love with each other. Even this one is really working at it. Look at it. He's pushing as hard as he can to get this couple to, pair off, we'll just say, right? To go have a romantic encounter, whatever. Obviously, they would probably go out of the group and go somewhere private. But these are all baby angels, which of course are mythical creatures. They're cupids, to be specific, and they form a partial border. In fact, this one here, it's harder to see, but I think you can see. Well, yeah, now you can't quite, because it's underneath that where it says screen sharing. But there's a baby angel at the top, one at each corner, one at this corner. So they help form a border around, it doesn't mean literally every square inch, but around the outer edges of his paintings, he would place mythical creatures.
Excuse me.
And so, yes, go ahead.
What would the unseen presence be?
Love, that's good. Good question. Excellent. I was just about to say what marks this is Baroque, which is the final thing about the meaning, is what style is it? We already mentioned the bulbousness. The unseen presence is romantic love, or you could say erotic love, because it's clear these people are going to hook up, is the phrase, I guess now. I mean, there's no question that's what they're there for, right? To come to this event at his wife's estate. So you could say romantic love or attraction. But of course, the emotion would be the feeling of, desire and love. So that obviously there's a slight overlap in that sense. The unseen presence is just the love is in the air. You've heard this, maybe not, but that phrase is, I've heard it for years, decades. The whole atmosphere of this is conducive to people falling in love. And so the unseen presence is the, promise of romantic love. And then the intense emotion is the attraction, the sexual attraction or physical attraction. And then, of course, the incrustation ornamentation speaks for itself in almost every Baroque painting, especially in a Rubens. I mean, look at the folds of their clothing and the ornately detailed or finely, I should say, finely detailed hairdos they each have, and even the columns have decorative detailing on them, right? And the fountain, right? It's not just a typical fountain, it's a lot of carved decorative features that wouldn't normally be, most fountains wouldn't have had. So the whole painting is full of an incrustation of ornamentation, bulbous rounded shapes, and of course, I just mentioned the intense emotions and the unseen presences. So, okay, formal analysis. I think it's roughly balanced, but I know some people say, well, this is empty here. So I wouldn't argue that if you see it as weighted or unbalanced toward the right, I think that makes sense. Certainly it's unbalanced toward the bottom because most of the human figures, if you draw a line right about here, are below the midline. And then we have the rhythm. Of course, group portraits always by definition have repeated shapes, heads, arms, hats, and even on the building behind them, the mock ruin, there's repeated shapes on the columns. The lines here are bold, though. That's another signature motif of his that I wasn't going to say is essential, but it's part of what you could write as a meaning if this is on the midterm. And he used bold outline around, at least more so than most painters of that period. Not all, but many of his human figures, and definitely around the ruin behind him. That's, you see, that's bold line. So he used bold outline and some thin, but mostly bold outlines around his figures. The modeling is soft.
I have a question about the lines.
Yes.
Is the boldness of a line determined by how much shadow is seen?
Yeah, that's a good way to look at it. Yeah, I mean,
Okay.
if it's an obvious example of a bold line, of course, sometimes it's just a thick line, then that's obvious even more so. Yeah, so that's a good way to say it, to put it. Mhm. Yeah, and
Okay.
you see that here, right? And
Right.
here, right? Yeah. Okay, and then here you see it mostly around the edges of this woman and this woman here, not so much the baby angels, but you see it here on this and this other Cupid here, right? On his arm there, right? So yeah, mostly he used bold outlines and soft modeling combined. That's another signature motif of his. So, and then of course the Superman textures are always sharp and realistic. Well, not always, but pretty much on all the clothing, the hair, a little bit softer Superman textures on the mock ruin. For space, this has atmospheric perspective, definitely, right? And then we have overlapping, obviously, foreshortening, especially on the steps here, but even on the bodies, the shoulders of the human figures. Diminishing size, and here there would be scientific perspective. The largest mass, will you decide? Is it this group of people, or is it all of them because they overlap each other? That's up to you. Or it's the mock ruin, and then the largest human figures would be the second largest masses. This woman who's in front of the man behind her, and these two standing closest to us. Okay, and then the colors obviously warm, cool, cool, warm, alternating, which is true of most Renaissance and Baroque painting. Okay, I'll skip this one because we want to get going here, but I definitely don't want to skip the next artist. Is really interesting, and one of the lesser known Baroque painters to Americans, but he's really famous in Europe and other parts of Latin America, for instance, because he was so talented. Okay, the next must know is it's on the next page, right? Charles the First. We just heard that Charles the Third became, right, the newly crowned. Is he crowned? He hasn't been crowned yet. Newly designated monarch of Great Britain, right? Everybody knows that. Well, let's go back to this view though, because I'll give you the title one more time. Charles the First, Roman numeral 1, right? That's it. That's the title. And then the artist's name is Van Dyck, 2 words. Van Dyck. He was Dutch. V-A-N, and then capital D-Y-C-K. Van Dyck, 1635. We're going to talk all about this painting in a minute. But first, let's talk about who he was. A quick tip to those of you who were looking for extra credit that's interesting, enlightening, and even fun to get while you're getting the credit for is the Legion of Honor in San Francisco is one of the few museums in California, if not the whole West Coast, to have several Van Dycks. I think it's 3 Van Dyck paintings on their walls. But this one is not the must know, but this is, I took this slide. It's powerful. This is Saint James, who became a doubter about Jesus's, being the Son of God, whatever. After Jesus was killed, he did not necessarily go out right away to preach the teachings that Jesus had been doing before he was executed. And the doubt and even self-loathing, you could say, or doubt among, or within, within his mind and his soul, if you will. Look at his eyes. Look at the intense expression here. And he is really asking himself, am I betraying my faith and my, friendship in this, man who used to be my, oops, the battery's running low now. Uh-oh. See, I told you nothing worked. Hang on. This connection is, for some reason, it's gotten loose, but I just reconnected it. So hang on. I'm going to do one thing that might prevent that from even possibly happening. Give me a second here. Okay, that shouldn't be a problem now. Let's get back to this. Okay, there we go. So it isn't the must know, but it's at the Boston Museum of Fine Arts. I don't think most Americans who go to Boston even know that they have one of the world's great museums of, let's say, 17th to 19th century art. They have an incredibly good, small, but really great collection. And when we get to the Slave Ship by Turner, I'm going to tell you what that painting will do to you if you stand in front of it, and it's at the Boston Museum of Fine Arts. Why isn't it in London where it was painted? We'll talk about that when we get to 19th century painting. It's a great museum. The Boston Museum of Fine Arts, I can't praise too highly. And most tourists never even think of going there. Okay, so let's move on to the must know. All right, so this is a portrait of the King of England, Charles I, who hired Van Dyck, who was one of the most successful portrait painters in Europe at that time.